And then what you see here is sort of a couple of schematics of what the GE boiling water reactor technology relies upon. Is a containment design that is not the overall reactor building, as you see here, but you see this large diameter donut, 18 feet in diameter, 1 million gallons of water, and then a bulbous steel structure in which the reactor vessel fits. And this is the containment structure that's credited as the barrier to catastrophe. And in principle, if there is a severe accident, if there is an overheating of the reactor fuel, overpressure, lots of steam, they got to deal with it, too much heat, they dump it into this dry well, as it's called, and then through 10 large diameter pipes, the heat and the steam and the pressure is driven under this 1 million gallons of water through these downcomers, as they're called, and the steam and the pressure and the heat are supposed to be quenched in that donut. And I'll just point out that the 3 engineers who were some of the principals that designed this, Dale Hubbard, Richard Miner, and Dale Rittenbow, publicly resigned their GE managerial positions before Congress in 1976, saying this won't work. And they were ignored. And but their warning followed the warning of Stephen Anauer, who was the AEC safety officer. Next slide. And what they all pointed out is that these GE BWRs, this all-important containment system for this particular design, is 1/6 the volume of the containment that you typically see in these large pressurized water reactors like Seabrook or like 3 Mile Island. But we know, we have known for decades that if this system is challenged under severe accident, it will fail. And when I was in front of CNN, that camera on March 11th, this was just history. I was just recounting history. Not my concern. We've been warned. We've been warned many times by different people, by the AEC. I'll add that in 1986, the chief safety officer with the NRC, Harold Denton, told us there's a 90% chance of failure of this containment design if challenged by a severe accident. How many warnings do we get? Japan has run out. In fact, one of the recommendations, well, I should add that following Harold Denton's warning, the NRC took the threat somewhat seriously. And the NRC in 1989 went to the operators of these 24 Mark I boiling water reactors in the United States and requested that they install a vent on containment. Next slide, I think it's the next slide. Yeah. They requested that the operators install a vent line. 8-inch, this is, what you see here is a schematic of a vent system that is routinely used in every boiling water reactor like Columbia.
Not every.
Well, no, let me finish. This schematic down here is what is in every boiling water reactor, and it is used to purge containment, to get in here for refueling, to get in here for routine maintenance and surveillance. So, and it goes through what they call the standby gas treatment, which is a charcoal bed radiation filtration system. So when they purge containment for routine operations, it gets filtered and then it goes out a 300-foot stack. The problem is that the containment is unreliable, which we've established, and the service vent is not capable of managing high pressure, high steam, hydrogen gas, radiation. And so in 1989, the NRC sent out a request that in order to provide a management strategy for a nuclear accident in one of these reactors, that you bypass this ductwork and you put a hardened vent line, an 8-inch steel line that bypasses the bottleneck and then comes directly out to the stack. So there's a control room operated valve that gives the operators the opportunity to defeat containment temporarily, to relieve the pressure and vent the hydrogen gas. It goes to a 30 psi rupture disk. That's tire pressure. That rupture disk and the valve then provided a direct line from the containment to the environment. I mean, this makes about as much sense as screen doors on a submarine. You know, they have completely defeated the idea. They should have removed the word containment because it no longer serves as a containment. This we saw at Fukushima Daiichi. This was installed in 1992 at all 6 units by TEPCO to service the plant in the event of a severe accident. And with the total power failure, this vent would not open. The radiation was too high for workers to get in there to manually open. And hydrogen gas, at this point, hydrogen gas has lifted the top of this component off its screws. And hydrogen gas is now getting into the reactor building, where in many cases, in all cases, it found ignition points. And we saw the detonations that we've been warned about since 1972 and have been completely ignored. Next slide. So we have an unreliable fix for unreliable containments. And this is the result of a production agenda that is so focused on its own self-interest that we have the tremendous amount of land contamination in Japan, I was just there in December of last year, and I can tell you that the cleanup operations, the Japanese have a word for it, for cleanup. They call it transcontamination. This is the Japanese, this is the interpretation of what the Japanese understand. Now, there is no cleanup. You just contaminate somebody else. And even in those operations, the contractors are it's a complete fraud. They're pushing contaminated soil into rivers. They're scraping up large areas of land, putting it in big piles, and covering it over with plastic, and that's it. That's the future. They're looking, the Japanese government is trying to persuade the people to share the burden, is how it's called. Take some of the contamination so they don't have it all. It's not going well for that plan. Next slide. So we have this one recommendation that's a big concern right now, is that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the nuclear industry are hell-bent to continue the operation of these antiquated, flawed, aging GEBWRs. These are cash cows. But there's a conflict right now between the regulator and the industry. The recommendation of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is, well, first of all, I should say that we have an order that's been issued. The order was issued on March 12, 2012, to all operators of Mark I and Mark II reactors, so it applies to Columbia. The order is that the operators at Columbia are to begin a set of changes and retrofits and upgrades to have a reliable vent. So the vents that were requested to be voluntarily installed on all Mark I's has now been extended to the Mark IIs. So Columbia is now being asked, only by order, to put a vent in.
When was that put in?
This is between the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
When was this Mark II built?
This was commissioned, it came online in 83.
Yes.
So it was probably started in the early 70s.
Yeah.
70s, 73.
72.
So it took 10 years to build. And this is a bit of an upgrade over the Mark I. But again, it's too small. The containment is not serviceable. The order that's in place is to put in these upgrades that would provide management strategies for Columbia to prevent fuel damage. Okay? So, longer fire hoses. More mobile diesel generators. More access to different kinds of cooling water. Pumper trucks. Bring more water in. Prevent the core damage. This is the order. The order, as it's written, expressly states this does not apply to any service post-fuel damage. So the order that's in place right now, which Columbia is to comply with by December 31st, 2016, it's 2 more fuel cycles, does not service the reactor for a meltdown. To me, that is Fukushima lessons unlearned. And again, it is a priority, a bias that promotes a production agenda over public safety. Now, the staff of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I mean, we were just all over this. You're ordering compliance for changes that don't address core damage? And they say, wait a minute, wait, don't, look, I'm a nice guy. We're going to look at the post-fuel damage event, but not in this order. We're going to take that up in another set of regulation, and another set of recommendations. And so, in November 2012, the staff introduced a draft order. And the draft order is to, basically what it presents is 4 options. Option 1 is to do nothing more than follow the March 2012 order for servicing containment vents pre-fuel damage, excluding post-fuel damage, option 1. So basically that means do no more. Option 2 is to install what they call a severe accident capable vent on all Mark 1, Mark 2, which means that it would upgrade the venting system on the current Mark 1 to include evaluations and changes and modifications that would take into consideration the consequences of fuel damage, namely high temperature, high pressure, and hydrogen gas. But option 2 provides no service for radiation. So, as one NRC operator has called it, those 300-foot stacks would become fire hoses of radioactivity, where they would vent the heat, the temperature, the hydrogen gas, but in the process they would also be venting radioactive particulate, fuel damage. Option 3 would be a severe accident capable vent with a high capacity filter. Next slide, please. Right, that's a little bit out of sequence, but we'll go with it. Option 3 would put a high capacity filter in this vent line so that you would essentially capture all of the particulate, but you would capture none of the noble gas. You can't filter that stuff out. So that means radioactive krypton, radioactive xenon would escape as a gas, and then as a decay product, within a matter of seconds and minutes, it would rain out radioactive particulate of strontium-90 and cesium-137. So the decay chain in those Nobel gas is particulate. But it would filter out a good bit of it if they have this filter in. I'm going to ask you to just advance a couple more slides here really quick. We're going to come back to this. One more. This is what has been installed in a Swiss boiling water reactor since Chernobyl. Basically all the European reactors have put in these filtration systems for filtering containment so that the operators have the option, in good conscience, they can say that they have preserved at least the principle of containment integrity, which is to keep the radiation in by putting a filter. They're venting it, they're defeating containment, but because they have a filtration system, at least they have some mindful attention to trying to keep the radiation and to keep the concept of containment. So these are routinely installed, but it basically provides, it gives the operator confidence that they can vent containment and not contaminate wholesale communities, massive land contamination, but not overpressurize the containment. So go back. Can you go back? Okay. So the what we now see in terms of this whole concept of nuclear regulatory capture is that within you are now part with this awareness, you are now witness that the staff of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has made recommendations to backfit Mark I, Mark II reactors with filters on high capacity on these hardened vent systems, and the industry is coming out wholesale against it. And they're joined by their champions on Capitol Hill. So the House Energy and Commerce Committee, 20 of the Republican members came out and said, no filters. Not cost beneficial. Public safety is only benefited in the most marginal, insignificant way by putting a filter on this new vent. The Nuclear Energy Institute, chiefly the lobby group on Capitol Hill for the nuclear industry, has come out against the filters. And the cost is going to be somewhere, it's difficult because they don't even have this out to vendors yet, anywhere from 16 to 24 million for the Mark I. For the Mark II, there's a problem, even for the filtered vent system, because the NRC has identified that the Mark II, like Columbia, is more vulnerable than the others to what they call containment bypass, where in the event of a core damage event, that where you would want to use the filter most in venting operation, in fact, there's a fly in the ointment for Columbia and the other 7, because if the core goes ex-vessel, if it goes through the bottom of the vessel, there are penetrations that the Mark II is going to be vulnerable to bypass containment. So a filtered vent coming off the containment is very likely to be bypassed. So it'll still get into the reactor building and eventually work its way out into the environment. So The Mark II is still on the drawing board. So they don't really have a fix yet in mind, although they think that it's plausible. But it's not as clear-cut as with that Mark I filtered venting system. So we're keeping our eye on the Mark II in that it has not been vetted to have a venting system that has any reliability. And so, but the industry, and it has still come out against that. And next slide. Go another one. I just wanted to end our comments here by the fact that you in this community are in a very unique situation because you have one of these very dangerous reactors co-located on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. You have millions of gallons of nuclear waste in these 177 tanks around the farm that are tentatively in stable condition. And Tom, I'm sure, could speak more eloquently and technically to this issue, but it's a tenuous situation where you now have a vulnerable reactor, next slide, co-located with this nuclear reserve. Next slide. These tanks were originally to service built in 1940s to service 20 years, and they're leaking. Next slide. Some of the tanks are leaking in the vicinity of the reactor. There are large contamination plumes moving under the Columbia Nuclear Generating Station. And so there is this threat that was never really evaluated in the license renewal for the Columbia Nuclear Generating Station. So they never really looked at the problem of how these two threats conjoined to perhaps to be a much larger threat. Next slide. And I just close on this note that we've seen this before many years ago in Kashtim in 1957, where the Mayak site was the plutonium production center for the Russian nuclear weapons industry, and it was principally the sister project of Hanford. And this is what we have now is a compounding of this nuclear threat. Next slide. Which brings me to the end of our talk, that we are faced with a growing, dirty, dangerous, and expensive threat, but we have a growing alliance of activists, now governments, with Germany phasing out nuclear power, Japan mobilizing to keep its nuclear power shut down. And so we're not alone in this active effort for a 21st century energy policy in renewables, efficiency, and conservation. So thank you.